Hello and welcome to the Slumbering Sloth Book Nook, a podcast about all things books, publishing, and more. My name is Emma, and today my guest is Lucy Pearson. Lucy runs the popular Lit Edit blog and is also host of the Bondi Literary Salon. Now on with the show. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Lucy. Oh,
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much. So first question, can you tell us about your current projects?
Yeah, of course. There are a few on the go at the moment. I split my time at the moment between Sydney and London. So whenever I'm back in the UK, which I am at the moment, there's always lots going on because there's a lot more of kind of a literary industry over here. So I've actually just got back from 5 days in Ibiza. I was over there creating some content for a travel guide brand called Marco Polo Guides. So that's been kind of the main one that I've been working on since I've got back. I'm doing quite a few hotel campaigns as well while I'm back in Europe. So there was a literary hotel in Ibiza that I visited. I've just been to one in Yorkshire, and then I have three in London and one in the Cotswolds coming up while I'm back. So lots of kind of content campaigns for the blog at the moment, which is good. Always keeps me busy when I'm back.
You sound a very busy person at the moment.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think it's the nature of the beast. Whenever I'm back in the UK, I think things are always a bit slower when I'm in Australia, but as soon as I'm back in Europe, it's always kind of go go go. So slightly hectic on European soil.
Yes, definitely. Because as you said, London's quite a literary based city. So there's always like some kind of
Yeah,
publishing going on, or there's some kind of, as you said, events going on to do with books.
yeah.
Would you say that it's like 90% of your time when you're in London is going to like lots of literary based and do lots of literary based content, as you said?
Yeah, definitely. I think because Australia's got lots of fantastic things going for it, but the literary scene isn't one of them. So I tend to kind of be in London two or three times a year. I was in London earlier in the year, but that was only for a week, working with the London Book Fair. So this time round, I'm back for a month, and it's lots of kind of book launches, and there are a couple of kind of live recordings of podcasts that I want to go to. Yeah, hotel reviews, brand collaboration. So just lots of book stuff going on while I'm back. I was hoping to make it up to Edinburgh for the book festival, but I think I might pass out with exhaustion if I do any more traveling than I'm already doing. So I don't think I'll get to that this time around.
Oh, bless. So, kind of moving on a little bit. So you're primarily sort of done a bit of book blogging. Is that right? In the
Yeah,
past, yeah. So,
yeah.
how did you begin book blogging?
Uh, so I always loved reading ever since I was a little girl. It's always been a really big passion of mine. And when I did my degree in English literature and language, and shortly after I graduated, I kind of graduated mid-recession, so there were almost no publishing jobs around. So I segued into beauty PR, and my boss at the time, she knew of my love of books. She kind of knew beauty wasn't really where my heart was. And she said to me, if you ever want to work in books, you really should start a blog. And this would have been, oh, grief, 8 years ago, I want to say, 7, 8 years ago. So it was kind of before blogs were as popular as they were now. And it coincided with my reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is one of my all-time favourite books. And I read it just after graduating, and there was a sticker on the front cover that said it was part of the BBC Top 100. So I decided to Google the Top 100, downloaded the list of books, and decided to read my way through the Top 100 around the time that my boss told me to start a blog. So it was kind of the combination of reading this list of 100 books and my boss's advice that I decided to start a book blog to kind of chart the books I was reading from the list of 100, and as a way of A, remembering which books I'd read, and B, remembering kind of what I thought of each of the books. So that was kind of how it started.
Yeah, it sounded like you kind of had that person to help you sort of go, right, this is where I need to narrow my focus. And
Yeah,
that's probably the great way to start reading, by like ticking like lists of books off.
yeah,
And plus it
yeah.
probably encouraged you way to read like way more different kinds of books.
Way more, yeah. That was a real kind of plus point of it. It was a way, a, to read books that I never ever ever would have read had I not been working my way through the list, and b, just to kind of really broaden my reading horizons, because I think despite having done um my degree in English literature, I still always kind of wangled the syllabus so that I was only ever reading what I wanted to read. And I did the same with my GCSEs and my A levels. I had an amazing English teacher called Mr. Parsons, and I think we were supposed to do a Winter's Tale for our GCSE Shakespeare, and I just point blank refused because I really didn't enjoy it. And he knew that I loved English, so he basically let me choose which Shakespeare text I wanted to do my coursework on. So I've always known what I've liked to read and been quite not narrow minded, but being quite, if I know what I like to read, I'll read the same author and the same kind of genre. So reading a list of 100, it was such a complete kind of kaleidoscope of books. It was a really wonderful way to read beyond my comfort zone.
Which Shakespeare play did you choose to do your GCSEs on?
Oh, Othello. I adore Othello. So that was a really easy one for me to pick. I haven't ever gone back to A Winter's Tale. I just couldn't really get to grips with it. And Othello for me is just a work of absolute genius. So I was very pleased that he let me choose that as my Shakespearean text.
That's awesome. So, obviously, your blog and your love of reading has sort of translated into, obviously, it's your career. Um, so
Yeah.
how has your love of reading inspired, like, crossed over with your love of travel?
Oh, so much. So I think one thing that I was quite keen to do once my blog was off the ground, I want that there are lots of book bloggers. It's probably not as popular or common a niche as travel or fashion blogging, but I really wanted to carve out a niche for myself beyond just books. So I think it was probably about 3 years, 2 3 years ago, I kind of decided to really hone in on literary travel. And off the back of that, I've done, so as I said, like I've done lots of literary themed hotels. I was lucky enough to attend like a memoir writing retreat in Guatemala, which one of my favorite authors run. I was in Jakarta earlier this year on a press trip as part of this year's London Book Fair. So that was me and a group of journalists from the UK. We visited Jakarta and found out about the literary scene there, and we visited this really amazing literary hotel on one of the islands south of Indonesia. And that was founded by an author whose book I then went on to buy and read, and is in my kind of top 10 books of all time. So I love I love reading books that are set in countries that I'm visiting. I lived in LA for 3 months and read almost predominantly kind of US based authors, and some quite famous books set in LA while I was over there. So I do like to kind of tie my reading into wherever I am at the time. When I was in Yorkshire recently, I started The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. When I'm in Australia, I do like reading some Australian novelists, not all of them, but I do try and read as much Australian literature as I can. And obviously, when I'm in London, I like reading kind of Dickens and what have you. So I do definitely try and combine my love of travel and literature together.
It sort of prepares you, I guess, sometimes before you go out to wherever you're going to be working, essentially. So it kind of
Yeah,
gives you, sets the scene. Does it make you get a bit more like excited about the trip and stuff? You're like, oh, I can't wait to,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think my I was in Paris at the end of last year, and I read The Hunchback of Notre Dame before I went there. So it's nice. It kind of sets the scene a bit, I think, before you travel somewhere or visit a certain part of the world. It definitely kind of whets your appetite for the adventures that lie ahead, I think.
Yeah, I mean, probably my favorite thing that I got at the moment is my friend gave me a book of called Tales from the Underground, and it was like loads of different short stories set on different tube lines in London. And I
Amazing.
absolutely loved it, and it was sort of set up in this commemoration for the opening of the Elizabeth line when it opened, and each one was sort of set on this different tube line or different rail line, and it was so good, and it was just such a different array
Oh,
of
that sounds
authors.
incredible.
Oh, I loved it. It was so good. So good. Thank you, Hannah, for picking that book out because I loved it. But it's always when you
Yeah.
go to London, I always read like different books from like different places. So I
Yeah.
can definitely relate to that. So that's great.
Yeah.
So kind of different turn, obviously with your blog. What advice would you give to someone that say wants to start a book blog and always a bit like, oh, would like to start one, but I don't know where to begin? What would you say?
Yeah, so there are a few different things that I would definitely kind of recommend to anyone starting a blog. I think certainly if you really have to have a real passion for books. I mean, I know that different bloggers work differently, but certainly for me, I usually get up at kind of 5 a.m. in the morning to read because I just feel like I'm going to be one of those people. I've said to my parents, when I die, I want to be like buried with the books that I never got around to reading. I think if you have a love for literature in the way that I do, there are always, there's classics that you want to read, there's new books that you want to read, there's kind of modern classics. So I'm constantly reading. More recently, I mean, this is probably slightly mad, and I don't think I'll get around to it in the same way that I managed to read the top 100. But I found a book called The 1001 Books to Read Before You Die. So I've kind of decided to do that, not with as much focus, I think, as the top 100, but I've decided to kind of read one from the list of 1,000 and then any other one that I want and alternate. But read widely, read as much as you possibly can. That would be certainly one piece of advice. And I think sometimes we're always waiting for the right time or the perfect time to start something. That I don't think there ever really is. I think just if you've got the idea, wait that you might be waiting for months if you want it to be a right time. I think just carve out an hour or two, choose your blog name, and just really kind of just make a start. I think there's so much. I certainly wasn't very technically minded when I started mine. It's my blog's had a couple of facelifts and one name change since I first started it, and you learn a lot of it on the go. So I think just start somewhere, have a passion for reading, and I think networking is a really, really important thing. I think we're very lucky. I am very aware that the much of the book world is very London centric, but with the internet and with Twitter and with Instagram and Facebook, it's very easy to kind of have a presence online regardless of where in the world you are. I mean, I spend a lot of my time in Sydney, where I live for most of the year. But I'm always on Twitter and just kind of, keeping an eye on the bookseller and seeing which authors are releasing what, and just having that conversation with authors that you like. I remember one of my favourite authors is Joanne Harris, who wrote Chocolat, and I had reviewed a book of hers, and I tweeted the review, and I remember she responded saying thank you. It kind of made the first year of my blog. I was absolutely thrilled to hear back from her. So I think networking is a really, really important thing, both with fellow book bloggers. There's a huge Bookstagram community, and also just with authors and publishers as well.
Yeah, of course. And I guess a lot of the time it all overlaps on Twitter, and a lot of people are sort of, people work in publishing obviously love books, and then it crosses over with people that obviously have, got book blogs and stuff. So it flows over really well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think just persevering. I think there's I think it's I mean, it does depend whether you kind of want your blog to translate in your career, or if you're happy for it to just be a passion project and a hobby. But I definitely think, you're not going to see huge results immediately. I mean, certainly for me, I remember when I started getting free books, I felt like my Christmases had all come at once, and I still love. That's still a huge kind of treat for me to come home to piles of books. But it was definitely a few years before it kind of started translating into work. I used to work for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I got that off the back of my blog, and then obviously being able to go on press trips to places like Indonesia. But I think it's very easy for us to see the success of other people online, but think that it probably falls in their lap. Whereas there is, I think, lots of hard work behind the scenes, and I would hate for anyone to think that it's not so much that, oh, I work so hard and I deserve this, but I wouldn't want anyone to feel disheartened by looking at other bloggers and thinking that it's perhaps easier, and not seeing kind of the work that goes behind it, because I do know myself and lots of other bloggers who do kind of work around the clock to keep the wheels turning. So it's an amazing career, and I wouldn't change a thing. But definitely in the early days, I was nowhere near at the point that I am kind of 7 years on.
Yeah, of course. So, what are your plans for your future projects, or what have you got coming up?
Oh, so quite a few different things. Depending on when I'm back in Sydney, I might be going to Latvia for a press trip to kind of to Riga to find out about the literary scene in Riga. I'm also in talks at the moment with the BBC. They are launching a new festival series called The Novel That Shaped Our World. And I believe they're releasing a new top 100 books. So I've kind of been on talks with them whether there's any opportunity to collaborate, or kind of whether I might read the next top 100, whether I want to put myself through another year or two of laborious reading. But so talks with that. Back in Sydney, I host the Bondi Literary Salon, which is a monthly literary salon at my local bookshop in Bondi, and we've got a couple of authors, including Mark Zuzak, who wrote The Book Thief. He's coming along for an event. I might be going to Ubud Literary Festival in Bali. So just lots of things to keep me occupied over the next few months. But reading is always at the kind of the crux of what I'm doing. So just when I found this new book, The 1001 Books to Read Before You Die, I had quite horrifyingly only read 95 of them. So my current mission is to get to 100, and I think I've got the book that I'm reading at the moment. When I finish that, then I'll be at 100, and then I'll have 901 left to do.
That's awesome. So finally, obviously I know we've talked about books, but what is a
Yeah.
book that you've read recently that you would love to recommend?
Um, How to Fail by Elizabeth Day is my most recent non-fiction read that I absolutely adored. She has quite a popular podcast called How to Fail with Elizabeth Day, and it's a book based on that, just about everything she's learned from failure, and it's kind of part memoir, part manifesto, and it's just absolutely fantastic. And then a fiction book that I've read recently that I adored is a book called The Rainbow Troops. I'm not going to try and pronounce the author's name. It's a long Indonesian one. This is the book that I bought when I was in Indonesia earlier in the year, and it absolutely blew me away. That's another one that's in my top 10 books of all time. I absolutely adore that. So The Rainbow Troops and How to Fail, depending on whether you're a fiction or non-fiction reader.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Emma.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers then. Bye bye.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. You can follow Lucy on Twitter at TheLitEdit. If you'd like to get involved with the podcast, you can get in touch through Twitter at NovelM16 and use the hashtag Slothcast, or you can send me an email at slumberslothbooknook@gmail.com. You can always find our podcast on our YouTube channel, Slumbersloth Book Nook, or you can download it from Podbean and Apple Podcasts for an on-the-go experience. See you next week. Bye!